What's up guys, Kavika here with Ninth App Studio, and today I wanted to go over when and why you start to increase your ISO. Okay, first I want to make sure that you guys understand that most of the stuff in this video is going to be based off of ideal shooting situations, where you have a pretty good amount of time to think through each shot. Now, obviously, we're not always going to be in ideal shooting situations, so I'll go over how the shooting process changes in another video, and eventually I'll be pointing at something up there. But at least for this lesson, it's important to understand that when you start to increase your ISO, you actually start to lose image quality. You lose dynamic range, which means your highlights and shadows lose detail, and then you also start to introduce noise into your image, which is not always something that you want. So right off the bat, you can kind of tell why it's beneficial to leave your ISO as low as you can if you can achieve the right exposure just using aperture and shutter speed. So let's go over 3 examples of how this might work in the field. And remember, this is in the ideal shooting situation where I can set up my camera in manual and have enough time to think through each shot. Okay, so example number 1, let's say I'm shooting a portrait. And once I've decided on a really nice composition, the main thing that I want to do is separate my subject from the background. Now that means I have to choose a wide aperture so that I have a shallow depth of field. Now once I'm happy with my depth of field, I'm going to go take a look at my shutter speed. Now I have to choose a shutter speed that's fast enough so that I don't have to worry about camera shake or motion blur. Now between my aperture and my shutter speed, maybe I got lucky. Maybe I nailed my exposure right off the bat. But what if I'm overexposed? Well, chances are I still have room to increase my shutter speed in order to bring the exposure back down. Now what if I'm underexposed? Well, if I decrease my shutter speed, I might get motion blur. And I'm already happy with the aperture that I chose because the depth of field is where I want it. Well, I guess my only option is to increase my ISO. Now let's go through another example. Let's say I'm out shooting a landscape, and I have a composition that I really like, and I want to make sure that the foreground and the background are in focus. That means I have to choose a small aperture so I have a deep depth of field. Now a smaller aperture obviously lets in less light, but maybe I can make up for it with my shutter speed. Now if I take a look at my shot and I realize there's really no perceivable motion in the scene, I can actually choose a pretty long shutter speed. And if I've got a tripod, I can probably even go up to a few seconds or more. But let's say there's a tree in the foreground and the wind's blowing out all over the place. Or I had like 25 cups of coffee this morning and I can't keep my hands from shaking. Well, then I might not be able to choose a longer shutter speed. And if that means my scene is underexposed, then really my only choice is to increase my ISO to bring the exposure back up. Now for our last example, let's say we're shooting a sporting event. Now with all these fast-moving athletes, my priority is going to be eliminating motion blur, so I have to choose a fast enough shutter speed. Now obviously faster shutter speeds mean less light, so I want to see if I can choose an aperture that's wide enough to make up for that. As a side note, that's actually where they get the term fast lens from. It's not actually that the lens is fast, but the lens has a wide enough maximum aperture that you can shoot with a faster shutter speed. So if your lens is fast enough, that means you can get the right exposure just using aperture and shutter speed. But if your lens isn't fast enough and you've opened up your aperture as wide as it can go and you're still underexposed, well, I guess your last option is to increase your ISO. So as you can see, in all 3 of these examples, if you have the time, you want to try and make sure you get the right exposure just using aperture and shutter speed. And if you can't, then you can start to increase your ISO. You guys, I hope this has been helpful in helping you understand the relationship between aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. If you guys have questions or you have requests for specific content, go ahead and leave a comment below. And if you want to see more videos like this, I hope you subscribe. But other than that, this has been fun. Again, I'm Kavika with Ninth App Studio. I'll see you guys in the next video. Shoots!